Thank you for viewing my presentation. My name is Mark Monoscalco. The title of the presentation is Voluntary Cooperation or Violence. There exists no middle way. During this presentation, we will discuss topics from my book, The Forbidden Idea. The ideas we will discuss are among the most liberating and most historically suppressed ideas in human history. They challenged established power by asserting that human progress comes not from violence, coercion, or royal decrees, but from the creativity and freedom of ordinary individuals. The forbidden idea is written for the forgotten man or woman who wakes each day and works tirelessly to build a better life, yet feels trapped in a system that seems stacked against them. The forbidden idea is this: individual liberty, grounded in natural law that predates government, is essential to a rational human life. Without it, we are reduced to slaves or beasts of burden. The philosophy of individual liberty is grounded in truths discovered by some of history's greatest intellectuals and confirmed by human experience over thousands of years. Yet, these ideas are rarely taught because they challenge the prevailing narrative of submission to higher political authority. Frederick Bastiat asked the question, and what is liberty? The answer begins with Aristotle, who reminds us that man naturally desires to know. St. Thomas Aquinas added, virtue requires choice, and choice requires voluntariness. Violence is opposed to voluntariness. Centuries later, John Locke contributed, the natural liberty of man is to be free from any superior power on earth, and not to be under the will or legislative authority of man, but only to have the law of nature for his rule. F.A. Hayek's response to Bastiat's question was, the state in which a man is not subject to coercion by the arbitrary will of another or others. And Murray Rothbard provides us with a necessary definition. Coercion is the invasive use of physical violence or the threat thereof against someone else's person or just property. These ideas bring us to a concise definition. Individual liberty is the absence of coercion. Whenever we speak of liberty, we should understand it as individual liberty. A collective cannot possess liberty because a collective does not think, choose, reason, or act. Only individuals do. A society is free only to the extent that the individuals who compose it are free from coercion. Ludwig von Mises explains that all rational action is, in the first place, individual action. Only the individual thinks, only the individual reasons, only the individual acts. Murray Rothbard makes a similar point from another angle. A group or society is simply a collection of individuals. Society is an abstract concept that does not exist independently of the individuals who make it up. Natural law. A universal standard of justice applies to everyone. This standard, which can be discovered through reason and intuition, binds all individuals and serves as the benchmark against which human-made laws should be measured. Natural law is the moral foundation of natural rights. Because human beings possess a rational nature, each individual has rights that precede government and cannot justly be violated by it. Frederick Bastiat explained this concept eloquently when he said, "Life, liberty, and property do not exist because men have made laws. On the contrary, it was the fact that life, liberty, and property existed beforehand that caused men to make laws in the first place. Natural rights are universal, applies to every individual equally, inalienable, cannot be taken away, transferred, or surrendered, non-conflicting, exercisable by all individuals simultaneously." The principle of self-ownership. You own your life, your labor, and the property your labor creates. No person or group can rightfully claim authority over your life. Owning your life enables you to experience events and activities as they unfold through time. Your life represents your future. Your liberty is your ability to act in the present. Your property represents part of your past, the labor, time, and effort you invested to create or acquire it. Losing your life means losing your future. Losing your liberty means losing your present. And losing the products of your life and liberty, your property, means losing a part of your past that was invested in creating them. Thank you to my good friend, Ken Schooland, who explains these concepts eloquently in his short film, The Philosophy of Liberty. Peaceful coexistence among human beings requires a framework that allows each individual to occupy space and control resources. Otherwise, conflict will arise as multiple people attempt to control the same physical space or objects simultaneously. The principle of self-ownership identifies three methods of acquiring property. 1. Mixing of labor, transforming nature into value. 2. Homesteading, claiming and improving the unowned. 3. Voluntary exchange, mutual consent between owners. Self-ownership is an inseparable component of individual liberty. While it may seem obvious and indisputable that you own your life, many members of our society argue against your right to own private property. However, an attack on private property is an attack on natural rights and ultimately a denial of your right to self-ownership. The non-aggression principle. If everyone upheld the non-aggression principle, we would all enjoy a life of peace and prosperity. The principle forbids aggression, which is understood to be all forcible interference with any individual's person or property except in self-defense. It defines protective boundaries around each individual. These boundaries typically encompass not only a person's mind and body, but also their legitimately acquired external property. Within these boundaries, individuals are entitled to full freedom from coercive interference by others, with each person's liberty limited only by the similar rights of others. Marie Rothbard's definition is, no man or group of men may aggress against the person or property of anyone else. David Friedman noted that the direct use of physical force is so poor a solution to the problem of limited resources that it is commonly employed only by small children and great nations. Negative rights and positive rights. Political discussions often include the term rights. Before we can make a meaningful and persuasive contribution to these discussions, we must first have a clear definition of rights. Father James A. Sadowski provided this definition. When we say that one has the right to do certain things, we mean this and only this, that it would be immoral for another, alone or in combination, to stop him from doing this by the use of physical force or the threat thereof. Rights can be divided into two categories: negative rights and positive rights. The term negative rights may seem to imply that those rights are undesirable, while positive rights sound like something beneficial. However, in this context, negative and positive do not denote value judgments about the rights themselves. Negative rights: freedom from coercion, right to life, do not kill, right to liberty, do not aggress, right to property, do not steal or trespass. Positive rights: coercion imposed on others, right to food, coerce others to provide food, right to housing, coerce others to provide shelter, right to education, coerce others to provide education, right to health care, coerce others to provide health care. Positive rights cannot be exercised universally and simultaneously by everyone. Their enforcement requires coercion to compel compliance. Therefore, they cannot be regarded as natural rights. The philosophy of individual liberty can be summarized in a short list. 1. And what is liberty? 2. The absence of coercion. 3. Natural law. 4. The principle of self-ownership. 5. The non-aggression principle. 6. Negative rights and positive rights. By fortunate coincidence, this list is also the table of contents for the first 6 chapters of The Forbidden Idea. A brief history of liberty. Explore the struggles of our ancestors and their greatest achievement, breaking free from the chains of tyranny. From ancient Mesopotamia to the 21st century liberty movement. This chapter contains some historical events you might have never encountered before. Sections of this chapter may even make you think this can't be true. Many of these historical events have been deliberately suppressed to silence the call of individual liberty and nurture the pestilence of tyranny. The struggle to achieve individual liberty is recorded in some of humanity's earliest written history. 2350 BC, Mesopotamia. Urukagina reforms abusive legal and governmental practices. 1750 BC, Babylon. Hammurabi's code places royal authority under written law. 1100 BC, Israel. Samuel warns that kingship means conscription, confiscation, taxation, and servitude. In this Bible story, the Israelites wanted a king because they sought security, stability, military protection, and national unity. They believed a centralized ruler would protect them and make them like other nations. But Samuel warned that kingship would come at a cost. The king would take their sons, daughters, fields, servants, livestock, and the fruits of their labor. In other words, monarchy would not merely govern them, it would claim authority over their lives and property. Samuel finished with this warning: when that day comes, you will beg for relief from this king you are demanding. Unfortunately, people often surrender individual liberty for the promised security of concentrated power. 500 BC, China. Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism and one of the first great champions of individual liberty, fought against government intervention. He warned that excessive laws and regulation make government an oppressor of the individual with this statement: government, with its laws and regulations more numerous than the hairs of an ox, is a vicious oppressor of the individual and more to be feared than fierce tigers. 500 BC to 1600 AD, the early Gaelic civilizations of Ireland provided a historical example of a complex social order that did not depend on a centralized coercive state. The Tuath was a local social and political unit. Legal disputes were handled under customary Brehon law. Brehons were not government officials in the modern sense. They were respected jurists selected for their knowledge and reputation. This civilization demonstrates that order and dispute resolution can arise from custom, reputation, and voluntary social institutions, rather than from centralized political coercion. When you are asked if there are any examples of a purely voluntary society, this is one. After losing the Battle of Bovines in 1214, King John faced rebellion from his nobles. In 1215, he was forced to accept Magna Carta, which recognized the body of liberties the monarchy had to respect. Its enduring importance is not that it fully created modern individual liberty, but that it established a crucial principle: the ruler and his government are not above the law. 1690, John Locke's second treatise of government helped define the purpose of legitimate political authority. Locke argued that people possess natural rights that exist independently of government. Government does not create those rights. Government's only legitimate purpose is to protect those rights. This idea strongly influenced Thomas Jefferson and appears in the Declaration of Independence's reference to unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Government does not grant rights. Its only legitimate purpose is to protect them. 1776, Adam Smith, with one elegant paragraph from his book, The Wealth of Nations, explained the beauty of economic freedom and voluntary cooperation. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our necessities, but of their advantages. Voluntary exchange transforms self-interest into cooperation. What began as a loose association of colonies became 13 independent states in a firm league of friendship under the Articles of Confederation. Later, a federal government was created by the Constitution. For the first 14 years of association, the 13 colonies and later states were independent sovereign nations with no president, no senate, no federal court system, no standing army. Under this association, the states were able to form foreign alliances, undertake foreign trade, and defeat the most powerful army on earth. The drafting of the Constitution and the ratification process were controversial at the time. The ratification process was contentious. In Our Enemy the State, published in 1935, Albert J. Nock concludes his discussion of the replacement of the Articles of Confederation with the Constitution in this passage. It is quite certain that dissatisfaction with the existing arrangement was not general, for when the redistribution took place in 1789, it was effected with great difficulty and only through a coup d'etat, organized by methods which, if employed in any other field than that of politics, would be put down at once as not only daring, but unscrupulous and dishonorable. Can individual liberty survive concentrated power? In 1850, Frederick Bastiat published The Law. He argued that plunder does not cease to be plunder merely because it is done through legislation. If wealth is taken from the person who owns it without consent and without compensation and transferred to someone who does not own it, property has been violated. Bastiat's test is simple. Does the law take from some people what belongs to them and give it to others to whom it does not belong? Does the law do for one citizen what that citizen could not do himself without committing a crime? If so, Bastiat says, that is legal plunder. In 1908, Franz Oppenheimer published The State. He distinguished between two ways human beings acquire material goods. The first is the economic means, one's own labor and voluntary exchange. The second is the political means, the forcible appropriation of the labor of others. This distinction is crucial because it reveals the moral difference between production and plunder, between voluntary cooperation and coercion. Oppenheimer argued that the state did not begin as a voluntary social contract. It began in conquest. In the first stage, robbery and killing dominate border conflicts. In the second stage, conquerors discover that it is more profitable to spare the peasants and their property, taking only the surplus. Oppenheimer compares this to the difference between a bear that destroys the hive and a beekeeper who harvests honey while leaving enough for the bees to survive. Over time, raids become regular tribute, violence is reduced, but exploitation becomes systematic. In the later stages, conquerors and conquered settled on the same land. The conquerors assume judicial authority, suppress private feuds, and enforce their own judgments. Eventually, customs, language, and worship begin to merge, and what began as conquest becomes a stable political order. Oppenheimer's point is stark. Violent robbery becomes organized tribute, and organized tribute becomes the state. When I speak of standing on the shoulders of giants, Ludwig von Mises stands among the tallest. He built on earlier economists and political philosophers, but he also introduced several groundbreaking ideas of his own. Mises began with a simple but profound observation. Individuals act. They choose goals, compare alternatives, and use means to pursue ends. Economics, therefore, is not about abstract collectives. It is about human action. His most devastating critique of socialism was the economic calculation problem. Without private property and capital goods, there can be no genuine market prices for those goods. Without prices, Central planners cannot know whether resources are being used wisely or wasted. So socialism does not merely suffer from bad leadership or poor incentives. It lacks the information system necessary for rational economic planning. No private property means no market prices. No market prices means no rational planning. In 1974, F.A. Hayek was awarded the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economics. Hayek's work connects two major insights. The first is the Austrian business cycle theory. Interest rates are prices too, the price of borrowing money across time. When governments push interest rates below their natural market level, they send false signals to entrepreneurs and investors. Projects appear profitable because credit is artificially cheap, but many of those projects are not supported by real savings and sustainable consumer demand. The result is an artificial boom followed by a painful bust. Hayek's second major insight was spontaneous order. In a free society, no central authority has to know everything. Knowledge is dispersed among millions of individuals. Market prices gather and transmit that knowledge. They tell people where resources are scarce, where demand is rising, and where opportunities exist. Hayek's lesson is simple but profound. Market prices coordinate human action. Government manipulated prices mislead it. Murray Rothbard took the logic of property rights to its most radical conclusion. If property is an extension of self-ownership, then taking property without consent is not a minor administrative act. It is a coercive seizure of something that belongs to the individual. Rothbard expressed this in one sentence. Taxation is theft, purely and simply, even though it is theft on a grand and colossal scale which no acknowledged criminals could hope to match. His point was moral and philosophical. If a private person may not take your property without consent, then the same act does not become morally different merely because it is performed by the state. This connects directly to Bastiat's idea of legal plunder and Oppenheimer's distinction between the economic means and the political means. The economic means rely on production and voluntary exchange. The political means rely on coercive appropriation. Rothbard forces us to ask a difficult question. If individual liberty means freedom from coercion, how can compulsory seizure of property be reconciled with individual liberty? Extreme poverty fell from 44% of the world's population in 1981 to 8.6% in 2024. Did you know that extreme poverty has declined so dramatically in such a short time? Individual liberty and economic freedom have lifted billions of people out of extreme poverty in less than 2 generations. This should be headline news, a widely known fact celebrated as one of humanity's most outstanding achievements. Is it possible that this is an inconvenient truth, counter to the worldview promoted by the collectivists and central planners? The current crisis. 3 philosophies converge to produce a cultural revolution that subordinates the individual to the collective. 1. Long march, takeover of the institutions. 2. Critical theory, oppressor versus oppressed. 3. Postmodernism, truth is subjective. Antonio Gramsci was a founder and one-time leader of the Italian Communist Party. While imprisoned under Mussolini for the last 10 years of his life, he developed his theory of cultural domination in his 3,000-page prison notebooks. His central insight was that political power rests not on force alone, but on culture. The ideas, assumptions, institutions, and moral norms people come to accept as legitimate. He realized that to transform society, a movement must control the institutions that form public consciousness. Schools, universities, churches, media, civil society. In Audacia e Fede, published in 1916, Gramsci wrote, "Socialism is precisely the religion that must kill Christianity. Capture the culture, and politics will follow." Another influence contributing to the erosion of individual liberty is critical theory, especially as it has spread through academia. Traditional Marxism divided society by economic class, capital owners versus workers. But when the predicted worldwide working class revolution did not occur, later Marxist thinkers re-examined the theory. Critical theory expanded Marxism's class struggle into a wider oppressor versus oppressed framework involving identity, culture, wealth, and institutional power. The word critical is important. Critical theory does not merely try to understand society objectively, it critiques society with the stated aim of liberation. Herbert Marcuse advanced this idea in his 1965 essay, Repressive Tolerance. He argued that classical liberal tolerance, allowing all viewpoints to compete freely, was not truly neutral. In his view, equal tolerance would preserve existing power because dominant ideas already controlled the schools, media, institutions, and public vocabulary. Marcuse therefore called for liberating tolerance, meaning greater tolerance for views considered oppressed and less tolerance for views considered oppressive. This marks a decisive break from classical liberalism. The liberal tradition relies on free speech, equal rights, property rights, and individual liberty. Critical theory treats those principles with suspicion, arguing that they may preserve domination beneath the appearance of neutrality. That is why critical theory directly challenges individual liberty. It recasts natural rights not as moral limits on power, but as a mask for oppression. The next philosophical influence is postmodernism. Postmodernism challenges the Enlightenment confidence in reason, objective truth, and universal principles. The Enlightenment tradition asserts that human beings can use reason to discover truths about reality, morality, law, and human nature. That belief is essential to the idea of natural law and natural rights. Postmodernism treats truth less as something discovered and more as something shaped by language, culture, and power. Under this view, what people call truth may simply reflect the vocabulary, assumptions, and social conditions of a particular time and place. Richard Rorty expressed this idea clearly. He argued that vocabularies are temporary and historical and concluded, since vocabularies are made by human beings, so are truths. That claim has profound consequences. If truth is made rather than discovered, then moral truths become unstable. Rights are no longer fixed limits on government power. They can be reinterpreted, revised, or replaced. by those who control the dominant language and institutions. This is why postmodernism poses such a serious challenge to individual liberty. Natural rights depend on the idea that truth about human beings are real, universal, and precede government. But if rights are merely products of language, culture, or political vocabulary, then those in power can redefine rights. And once rights are redefined by political authority, those new definitions can be enforced through coercion. Social justice, the combination of these three collectivist philosophies. The long march through the institutions provided the strategy to control the culture. Critical theory supplied the oppressor versus oppressed framework. Postmodernism weakened belief in objective truth and replaced it with language, narrative, and subjective experience. Together, these ideas produced what I am calling a new social justice creed. In this framework, truth is no longer understood primarily as something discovered through reason. It is increasingly treated as lived experience, meaning that personal or group experience substitutes for universal truth. Moral authority is then ranked by oppression status. The more oppressed a person or group is considered to be, the greater moral authority that person or group is assumed to possess. Those considered privileged are treated with suspicion, and their arguments may be dismissed before they are even considered. Intersectionality is the mechanism that ranks these claims. It measures oppression by adding together identity categories: race, sex, class, sexuality, handicap, and other markers to determine who occupies a higher or lower position in the hierarchy of grievance. The result is a radical redefinition of individual liberty that no longer means freedom from coercion. It becomes collective liberation from oppression. The individual is subordinated to the group. Property rights are also redefined. They are no longer treated as universal protections grounded in self-ownership and natural rights. They are treated as barriers to equity unless they serve redistribution or collective justice. That is the final consequence. Individual liberty and property rights cease to be fixed rights belonging equally to every person. They become conditional privileges granted or withheld according to group identity, oppression status, and the shifting political meaning of equity. What must be done? Andrew Breitbart believed that politics is downstream from culture. This is very similar to Gramsci's takeover of the institutions. Change the culture, and politics will follow. We will change the culture by continuing our education in the philosophy and history of individual liberty, making us more persuasive advocates. Study my curated reading list at therootofliberty.com. Build little platoons of close associates, family, friends, neighbors, coworkers, church members, and local associations. People who know you and trust you. Convince your little platoons that individual liberty is our ultimate goal. Encourage your little platoons to share these messages. The only way out of the impending catastrophe is major reductions in government spending at all levels. Build and support alternative institutions. Expand school choice and curriculum reform. Remove your children from government schools. Attend and participate in meetings of local government agencies. I will close with two strategies to find freedom in an unfree world. The first is attributed to Albert Camus. The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. This is a call to moral independence. In an age of conformity, coercion, and cultural pressure, the free individual becomes a living act of resistance simply by refusing to surrender his judgment, his conscience, and his dignity. The second recommendation is the motto adopted by Ludwig von Mises. Do not give in to evil, but proceed ever more boldly against it. That is the spirit we need. Not bitterness, not despair, not retreat. Courage. Individual liberty is a beautiful and elegant ideal based on truths discovered, defined, and defended over thousands of years by some of mankind's greatest intellectuals. It is grounded in natural law, self-ownership, the non-aggression principle, and negative rights. Individual liberty is the absence of coercion, the recognition that each person owns his life, his labor, and the property his labor creates. Individual liberty advances whenever one person refuses to surrender the truth. Whenever one family teaches its children the philosophy of individual liberty. Whenever one community chooses voluntary cooperation over coercion. And whenever one citizen stands calmly and confidently in defense of individual liberty. With unwavering commitment to our principles and a passionate determination to inspire others, we can achieve individual liberty in our lifetimes. Defend individual liberty, advance it, live by it. Working together, we will rise upward to liberty.